Let me show you an extremely powerful hidden feature within Blender called App Templates. This gives you the ability to have multiple user preferences, add-on setups, UI layouts, custom scripts on startup, and even your own splash screens. Let's get straight into this. First and foremost, the Blender documentation is linked down in the description as well. Now, don't be scared by it. There's not a lot of changes we have to do at all. This is very much default Blender. I just need to show you where things live. The Blender documentation is brilliant if you get stuck, and especially if you're talking about running custom scripts on startup. There's a lot more information in there than I'm going to be able to provide in this video. With that said, let me show you where things live, where we're going to be changing things up, adding things, and just getting to grips with where everything lies when we're playing around with our app templates. So you might be like me and you have Blender set up in a very particular way for your workflow right now. For instance, I have everything set up in millimeter scaling. My UI is quite big and bulky so that it comes across well in video. I have a whole bunch of add-ons, plus I have a whole bunch of shortcuts done as well. So the key thing that we need to understand is where exactly are these preferences saved and what exactly is the relationship of this new file structure right here. Well, to understand that, we need to head over back to the documentation, and that is linked down in the description. It's this page right here, which is the configuring directories. There's the local, user, and system, and the only one we're interested in is the user one, because the system and local one, we usually don't really want to play around in there. So Windows, you're there, Mac, you're there, Linux, you're there. Remember, linked down in the description. And now I'm going to show you Windows users how to get there. We're going to type in run. We're going to put in %appdata% because it is a hidden folder. It's going to be inside of your app data roaming. And here it is, Blender Foundation, Blender 3.0, and now everybody else should have the exact same file structure at this point. Now, very quickly, I want to show you where the wrong place looks like. And that is right here. You do not want it to look like this. You can see there's a big difference. Inside of here, you have 3.0, and you'll have scripts very much now starting to go back into that way. Now, the reason why I brought this up is because I also want to show you, if we go to scripts, we have this startup file here, and then we have this BL app template system, because we are in the system directory here. And inside of here, you're going to see 2D animation, sculpting, and all that. And that looks very familiar because that is the file new structure right in there. So let's go into one of those and see what's going on. Inside of here, there's a file called startup, and there's this NIT file or an init file, and this has a couple of extra little things as well that we'll cover. But now that we know the structure, it is BL_app template system, we need to create the same thing. Now, just before we do that, I want to do a backup of something very important. Right here, we have this config folder. Inside of here, you have this startup and this user preferences. These are your user preferences that you've worked so hard to create, and this startup file is actually the startup file. When you go here in defaults and save startup file, that is that startup file. So I'm going to grab both of these. I'm going to copy them. I have a little folder here called backup, and I'm going to paste those in there because I actually need my user preference file as a backup later on. Okay, now that I've done that, let's go back to 3.0. Let's go into scripts, and you'll see there's no startup folder. So let's create that. So startup folder, sorted. Next up, we're going to go inside of here, and now we're going to do BL_app_templates_user. Now that we've created this, we're going to go inside once again, and we're going to create another folder. Now this can be your first, whatever structure you want to create. I'm just going to call this test for now. And inside of here, I'm going to grab my backup. I'm going to copy these two, and I'm going to paste that in there. Now, what's great about Blender is that this is instantaneous. If we go over to File, New, you will see Test right there. So if we click on Test, don't save, there is no need to. Now we have Test exactly as we want it. You'll see it set up in my millimeter unit scaling because it's using everything that I've set up before. So I'm going to change this file to be what I want it to be. So I want this to be 1 unit scaling. I also want this to be back into meters. I also want to change my grid scaling here back to 1. And then the really big change that I want to do is I want to go back to Edit, Preferences, put everything back to load factory preset. Bam, big change there. And you see here, save preferences. There's a little star because it hasn't saved. So let's click that to make sure that those are saved in place. Now that I've done this, I need to save this file as well. So I'm going to go File, Save As, and on my desktop, I'm going to save this file as Startup. So that is going to be my startup right there. This is going to be my quote classic version of Blender. So now that I've done that, inside of here, we have our test file. So I'm going to go back here to this startup and user preferences. I'm going to delete those, not cut, delete them. Thank you. This startup file, I'm going to put that inside of test. And then I'm going to go all the way back to 3.0. In that config, there's that user preferences that I've just overwritten. So let's copy that. I'm going to go back to 3.0, back into my scripts, back into the startup, back to the users, back to the test, and paste that in there. Now, I want to have my old preferences as well when I'm usually using Blender. So I'm going to go back to my config here. Inside of my backup, I'm going to grab that user preferences. I'm going to make a copy of it, delete the user preferences that are there right now, and paste my old preferences back in there. Now, I'm going to close all of this. It is instantaneous. You don't need to restart Blender, but I like to just close Blender completely and restart it once again. And now you'll see that everything should be back to normal, back to the settings that you had it before. So my unit scaling, a whole bunch of add-ons, everything's there for me. But now I can go into File, Test, and everything goes back to default for me. So this here, no add-ons, back to unit scaling, everything's back. So what else can you do with this? Well, if you look at the documentation, it tells you can do a lot more. Now, I've already gone and created a whole bunch of these. You'll see I have my new startup here, BL Touch, whatever, and I have here my 3D print design one, my classic one, my video one, precision modeling, and terrain generator. So I'm going to copy all of these. I'm going to put these inside of my app data roaming file. So scripts, startup, my user one. I'm going to delete this test file, paste in all those new ones, and just give you a little guided tour of what's going on in here. But just before I do that, you might have noticed that in that intro bit, there are these two shortcuts as well. So these shortcuts, you can see one goes to empty videos and the other one goes to terrain. How do I do that? Well, when you go into the properties of this, you can add a little command line right here. I'll just zoom in for you so you can see what's going on. And all you have to put in is app dash template space, and then put in whatever the file name is that you're trying to activate. And that will basically open it up in that way. So my MakerTales one, when I double click it, you'll see it'll open up. And not only that, but I have a custom splash screen right there for it. Let me just show you how that's done. You'll see when I created these inside of here, you'll see that I have my empty videos. There's this splash photo right here. And it just needs to be a particular size. It's in the documentation. It is 1000 pixels by 500 pixels. Chuck that in there. PNG with a splash, and that's in there. Again, you can see it has a user preference and a startup that I've put in for this one. Now, just before we jump to the next one, I want to just show you inside of my terrain gen, we have this startup, the user preferences, a splash, and this ini. This file is just created automatically. This here is the init file. Inside of this file, I've added a little bit of code. And inside of this code, I've added basically create a plane, give it some subdivision modifier, give it a nice little displacement modifier, and on top of that, create a texture and randomize the noise scale and the contrast. Register that into the startup and unregister that. And trust me, I know it sounds complicated, but it isn't. It's just a little bit of code that you can get into if you want. And eventually I will be doing videos on that. So feel free to subscribe for when they come out. So because I've done that, when I click on my terrain generation one, I get my lovely little splash screen, plus I get some randomly generated terrain. So if I go Control N for a new file and click terrain gen, you'll see that every single time I click it, it will generate something different every time. And that there is pretty much the power of app templates. You can take this like I've done. I've created a 3D printing one where I've got an entire scene here with a 3D printer and a volume indicator to show myself what I can print on this. I also have another one for my videos. As you've already know, this is the default one that I use that has all my add-ons. It's everything's in millimeters. I also then have my classic one, which is basically everything off. So all the add-ons are off, everything's back to factory resets, and I also have my scale back to meters. And there you have it. I hope that opened up the world of possibilities that there's available with app templates in Blender. If you found it a little bit complicated and you need some help, remember that we have a Discord that's linked down in the description, and the documentation, trust me, there is so much information there. That's probably going to be the best place possible, but we are there as a community to help all each other out. A huge thank you to my patrons. You guys are absolutely awesome, and without you, I wouldn't be able to make Maker Tales. And if you're enjoying what I'm making here, you think I'm worthy of your support, I would love to see you there too. Remember, we have that Discord, and it's linked down in the description. Thank you for watching, keep making, and let the quest continue.